Welcome, my friend, to the warmth of Baker Street Ember. Settle in by the fire.
As we prepare for tonight's tale, I must ask, from which shadowy corner of the world are you listening? If you find comfort here, please subscribe and leave a like to support the channel. Now.
London fog lay thick upon the city that winter evening. At 221B Baker Street, Holmes sat idle, craving challenge. Then came the urgent knock. Lord Reginald Harrington found dead at his Mayfair mansion, body torn as if by demonic claws in a locked study. Scotland Yard saw a tragic accident or suicide, but Holmes saw a link, the wounds inconsistent with natural talents. One link in a chain that would bind a killer. The game is afoot. Chapter 1. The First Link. I set down these events as they occurred in the winter of 1892, when the chill of the Thames seeped into every corner of London, and the fog wrapped the streets like a shroud. Holmes and I had just returned from a minor affair involving a forged will, and my friend was in one of his restless moods, pacing before the coal fire that crackled merrily in the grate at 221B Baker Street. The room carried the strong scent of tobacco from his Persian slipper, blended with the damp fog clinging to our coats and the faint carbolic from his latest chemical experiment bubbling quietly on the side table. The 17 steps from the street echoed with hurried footsteps that evening. Mrs. Hudson's voice rose from below. "A visitor, Mr. Holmes." Inspector Lestrade from Scotland Yard, and he looks most agitated. Holmes' eyes gleamed with that peculiar light as he steepled his fingers under his chin, the rough tweed of his dressing gown brushing the worn leather armchair. I rose to stoke the fire, feeling the warm glow push back against the bitter fog pressing at the window panes. Lestrade burst in, face flushed from the cold, boots carrying the smell of coal smoke and Thames mud. "Holmes, Watson, thank heavens you're in. We've a devil of a case in Mayfair. Lord Reginald Harrington found dead in his locked study this afternoon, torn to shreds as if by some wild beast or demon." He paused, wiping his brow with a damp handkerchief that felt clammy in the heated room. Holmes leaned forward sharply. "Details, Lestrade. Data, data, data. I cannot make bricks without clay." Lestrade nodded, his heavy breathing mixing with the distant clatter of handsome wheels on the cobbles outside. Lord Harrington was alone in his study at the mansion on Grosvenor Square. His valet heard a terrible scream around noon, forced the door. It was locked from inside, and found him mangled on the floor. No weapon, no intruder. Windows barred and shut tight. The wounds, deep, ragged, like claws. Scotland Yard thinks perhaps a fit of madness, self-inflicted, but the family insists on foul play. The inspector paced, footsteps thudding on the creaky floorboards. I poured hot tea from the kettle, steam rising with comforting warmth against the chill draft from the sash window. "It sounds impossible, Holmes. A locked room, how could a killer enter?" Holmes drew upon his pipe thoughtfully, the sweet brandy-like aroma of his shag tobacco filling the air. "Impossible is a word for the unimaginative, Watson. Tell me of the family and associates." Lestrade sipped his tea, a bitter coffee taste still lingering on his tongue from his long shift. "There's Lady Harrington, his wife, quite distraught. His business partner, Mr. Elias Thorne, a financier from the city. The valet, Jenkins, loyal for years. A rival, Sir Victor Langford, over some estate dispute. Miss Eliza Croft, the niece, who stands to inherit. And a mystic consultant, Dr. Oswald Grimshaw, whom Harrington consulted recently about occult matters." The fog horn from the river moaned distantly, giving the tale an eerie weight. Holmes' violin rested on the mantel. He plucked its strings absently, the twang cutting through the fire's crackle. "We must go to the scene at once." I grabbed my coat, feeling the smooth pipe stem in my pocket for comfort. The hansom cab rattled through fog-shrouded streets, cold cobblestones jolting us as Big Ben chimed the hour. Gaslights flickered like ghostly eyes, casting shadows on damp newspaper vendors calling headlines. We reached the grand Mayfair mansion, its facade looming in the mist, smelling of wet stone and leather from the waiting police carriages. Inside, the study was a scene of horror. Lord Harrington's body lay covered, but bloodstains on the Persian rug carried a metallic tang mixed with faint gunpowder residue, odd and out of place. The air hung thick with coal smoke from the dying fire. Rough tweed curtains and smooth mahogany desk assaulted the senses. Holmes examined the body, fingers tracing the wounds with clinical calm. The mud on his boots fresh with reddish clay and coal dust. The link, such a mixture exists only near the Whitechapel foundries by the docks. The forge, I encountered similar in the red-headed league case, where booed evidence demolished an elaborate alibi. The criminal forgot that Brown remembers every step he takes. There, the villain claimed he was at his club, but the clinging soil linked him to the bank tunnel beneath. Just as here, the earth betrays the hidden journey. The chain, therefore, Harrington was not secluded in Mayfair all morning as reported, but near the East End, perhaps in a secret meeting. The link forges strong. Watson, did you see it form? The bind. I nodded, astonished as ever. The room's cold morgue-like chill made me shiver, contrasting the hot tea earlier. Footsteps sounded in the hall as Lady Harrington entered, her silk gown rustling softly. My husband. Who could do this? She wept, voice trembling amid rain pattering on the windows. Holmes paced rapidly before the barred window, eyes scanning every detail. Another link, fresh scratches on the desk, splinters of ebony. Not from claws, but perhaps a tool meant to mimic them. He knelt, inhaling the faint leather scent from a discarded glove nearby. The valet Jenkins hovered, his livery carrying carbolic soap. Sir, he was alone, I swear it. Holmes' gaze fixed on him. Yet the chain begins with deception. Tell me of his recent visitors. Jenkins fidgeted as the fire crackled and embers popped. Mr. Thorne came yesterday, arguing about investments. And Dr. Grimshaw, with his talk of demons. The fog outside thickened, muffling the city's sounds. Holmes studied the lock, intact, but bearing faint scratches. The window bars cold iron, unbent. But this residue, wax, perhaps from a molded key. I felt the damp newspaper in my pocket, headlines smudged. Evening drew on, and back at 221B we sat by the fire. The warm hearth drove out the bitter fog's chill, tobacco smoke curling lazily. Holmes reflected quietly. In the Musgrave ritual case, a locked chamber concealed treasures, but the key lay in ancient ritual, passed down and misunderstood. There, verse clues linked past to present, forging a chain that bound the butler to his greed. Just as here, the locked room poses no true barrier to logic. It is merely a link waiting to connect. I sipped sweet brandy, its warmth spreading. Remarkable, Holmes. He gave a faint smile. The link was there. Did you forge it before, Holmes? Holmes saw 3 links. How many did you spot? Watson missed it. Did you? What chain would YOU build from these observations? The connection seems invisible. Can you see it? Before Holmes explains, what does this evidence chain tell you? The first link forged. The chain begins. Chapter 2. Forging Connections. As I continue this chronicle in my journal, the events of that first full day after the discovery remain vivid, the fog of London seeming to mirror the thickening mystery. The morning dawned gray and damp, the bitter fog seeping under the door of 221B Baker Street and carrying the ever-present smell of coal smoke from the chimneys below. Holmes was already awake, his chemical apparatus scattered across the deal table, giving off a sharp carbolic odor that blended unpleasantly with the damp newspaper I spread open over our breakfast. Today, we visit the principal persons connected with the case. Watson, Holmes announced, reaching for his Persian slipper and filling his pipe with tobacco whose rough texture he knew so well. Links do not forge themselves in idleness. The coal fire crackled warmly in the grate, a welcome contrast to the cold cobblestones we would soon tread. Mrs. Hudson entered with the tea tray, steam rising invitingly. "Mind yourselves out there, gentlemen. All Mayfair is whispering of devils and curses." I tasted the bitter coffee she had mistakenly added to the pot and grimaced. Our first call was to the city offices of Mr. Elias Thorne, Lord Harrington's business partner. The hansom cab rattled over the uneven cobbles, wheels rumbling like distant thunder, while fog horns moaned from the direction of the Thames. Thorne's counting house smelled strongly of leather-bound ledgers, fresh ink, and the polished mahogany of his massive desk. Thorne rose to greet us, a stout man with a booming voice that echoed off the high ceiling. "M.R. Holmes, Dr. Watson, I expected you sooner or later. Dreadful business with poor Reginald." He paced slowly, boots thudding on the worn Turkey carpet. "Indeed," Holmes replied. "Tell us of your partnership and the last meeting you had with him." His keen eyes scanned the room. I noticed a faint gunpowder scent drifting from an open drawer, perhaps from sporting activities. "We handled colonial investments, tea estates and Ceylon mostly. Very profitable until recently. Reginald grew uneasy and wished to withdraw his capital. We argued rather heatedly the day before it happened." Thorne's thick fingers toyed with a damp handkerchief, its texture rough like tweed under nervous pressure. I felt the cold draft from the tall window chilling my knuckles. "Any other parties who might have wished him harm?" Thorne gave a short, bitter laugh. "In the city? A dozen at least. But demons tearing a man apart in a locked room? Absolute nonsense." Rain began to patter against the glass panes, muffling the cries of street vendors outside. Holmes leaned closer. "Your left cuff carries a faint stain, reddish clay. From the Whitechapel docks, I presume?" Thorne's color drained noticeably. The fire in his small grate crackled sharply. I had a meeting with shippers there 2 days ago. Nothing sinister. This observation connects to that one. A chain forms. Our second visit took us to Sir Victor Langford's residence in Belgravia. The cab's leather seats creaked beneath us as we traveled. The fog had thickened so that gaslights appeared only as blurred halos. Langford's drawing room reeked pleasantly of strong pipe tobacco and beeswax polish, the textures of smooth rosewood furniture and rough stone hearth very evident. Langford received us standing, tall and aristocratic, his voice clipped and precise amid the steady ticking of a tall case clock. Harrington owed me a considerable sum from a joint land venture in Kent. But murder? Preposterous. I was at my club the entire day, witnesses aplenty. Holmes studied a telegram lying open on a side table. "This message is from Harrington himself, canceling your proposed meeting for the very morning of his death." Langford shrugged indifferently, though his jaw tightened. "Proves nothing except that he changed his mind." I accepted a small glass of sweet brandy he offered. Its warmth spread pleasantly through me against the chill seeping in from the street. Yet Holmes' gaze lingered on faint ink smudges on Langford's right forefinger, still slightly tacky. "You handled a pen quite recently, Sir Victor. Perhaps composing or copying a message?" Langford's composure wavered for the briefest moment. Our third stop was Miss Eliza Croft's modest lodgings in Kensington. The fog was now so dense that Big Ben's chimes sounded muffled and far away. Her small sitting room carried the scent of Thames mud-tracked in on boots and faint lavender from dried sachets. The wallpaper felt slightly damp and peeling under my fingertips as I stood near the hearth. Miss Croft, a slender young woman of about 25, poured tea with trembling hands, steam mingling with the carbolic smell drifting in from a neighboring chemist's shop. "Uncle Reginald was always kind to me," she said softly, voice breaking amid the steady drumming of rain on the slate roof. "But that dreadful man Grimshaw, he filled my uncle's head with talk of curses and demons." Holmes paced slowly before the small fire. "Your inheritance is substantial, I understand?" She nodded, the worn leather armchair creaking beneath her slight weight. "Yes, but I would never." Her words faltered. "The chain grows, link by link. Our final call that afternoon was to Dr. Oswald Grimshaw's curious establishment in a narrow Soho street. Fog pressed against the grimy windows. Inside, the air was heavy with incense, old books, and the sharp tang of gunpowder from recent ritual displays. Velvet curtains felt rough to the touch. Cold metal talismans hung from the walls. Grimshaw greeted us in a low, whispering voice, his hooded eyes gleaming in the flickering gaslight. Lord Harrington came to me seeking protection from an ancient curse, the so-called demon of Mayfair, an old family legend. His words seemed to slither through the smoky air. Holmes lifted a small glass vial from the cluttered table and sniffed its contents, carbolic mixed with something acrid and herbal. This preparation, harmless herbs, you claim? Grimshaw offered a thin, knowing smile. Merely protective symbols, Mr. Holmes. Nothing more. The small coal fire crackled, barely warming the bitter cold that clung to our coats. By evening, we returned to Baker Street. Holmes drew thoughtfully upon his pipe, tobacco smoke curling lazily toward the ceiling while the fire cast dancing shadows across the room. Links are forging, Watson, clay from Thorn's cuff tying him to the docks, a possibly forged telegram in Langford's hand, strong motive and occult influence from Miss Croft's testimony, and Grimshaw's curious preparations. The valet Jenkins we shall question tomorrow. I settled into my chair, feeling the smooth stem of my own pipe between my fingers. The web grows more tangled by the hour. The link was there. Did you forge it before, Holmes? What chain would YOU build from these observations? Holmes saw 4 links forming already. How many did you spot? Watson missed several. Did you? The connection seems invisible at first. Can you see it yet? Before Holmes explains further, what does this growing evidence chain tell you? Links forging. The chain takes shape. Chapter 3. The chain grows. Looking back upon these pages, I am continually struck by how swiftly the fog of confusion began to part, revealing the iron links of evidence beneath. The following morning arrived with persistent rain that drummed steadily against the windows of 221B Baker Street, while the coal fire in our sitting room crackled defiantly against the bitter chill that seeped through every crack. The familiar smell of strong tobacco from Holmes' morning pipe mingled with the damp, inky scent of the newspaper I had spread across the table. We must return to the crime scene itself, Watson, Holmes declared, setting his pipe aside and rising with sudden energy. The most crucial evidence is often overlooked in the first hasty examination. He plucked a few idle notes from the strings of his Stradivarius violin, the sharp twang cutting through the quiet room. Mrs. Hudson appeared shortly afterward with the tea tray, the steam from the pot carrying a comforting warmth into the air. The hansom cab splashed through deepening puddles as we made our way once more to Grosvenor Square, the wheels rumbling heavily on the cold, slick cobblestones. Fog horns groaned mournfully from the direction of the river, and the gas lights along the way appeared only as pale, diffused halos in the mist. When we reached the Harrington mansion, the study still carried the faint metallic tang of dried blood overlaid with lingering coal smoke from the hearth that had been relit by the servants. Holmes moved at once to the great mahogany desk, kneeling to examine once more the fresh scratches we had noticed the previous evening. Observe these splinters, ebony wood mixed with minute particles of steel filings. The link, ebony, is uncommon in ordinary Mayfair households, yet steel suggests precision work, perhaps the teeth of a small mechanical contrivance designed to imitate claw marks. The forge. I recall a strikingly similar device in The Adventure of the Speckled Band. There, a cunning stepfather employed a ventilator, a dummy bell rope, and a trained swamp adder to murder in a locked bedroom. The chain was forged from tiny bedpost marks, a faint milky saucer residue, and the whistle in the night, each observation connecting until the entire murderous mechanism stood revealed. The villain believed nature itself his accomplice, yet logic bound him inescapably. The chain, here too, these wounds are artificial, produced by a hidden apparatus within the room itself. The link forges firmly. Did you perceive it at once, dear reader? The bind. I felt a shiver run through me, not only from the morgue-like cold of the unused study, but from the growing certainty of Holmes' reasoning. The rain continued to patter relentlessly outside, muffling the distant chime of Big Ben. Footsteps sounded softly in the corridor, and the valet Jenkins appeared, still carrying that faint odor of carbolic soap on his livery. "Is anything further required, gentlemen?" he asked, voice low. Holmes straightened and turned his piercing gaze upon the man. The lock on this door, intact, yet bearing traces of wax along the keyhole edge. "You have oiled it recently?" Jenkins hesitated, fingers twitching at his side. "Only as part of my regular duties, sir." Holmes nodded slowly, then crossed to the paneled wall opposite the window. His long fingers moved methodically along the wainscoting until he found a section that yielded slightly under pressure. A narrow hidden compartment opened with a soft click, releasing a faint musty smell of Thames mud and old paper. Inside lay a crumpled fragment of telegram paper. "Urgent. Meet at usual place by the docks. Do not fail. T." Holmes held it to the light. Initialed by Thorne, no doubt. Another link slides into place. Lady Harrington entered at that moment, her silk gown rustling like dry leaves. Her face was pale, eyes red from weeping. My husband spoke often of a family curse, the demon of Mayfair. Dr. Grimshaw warned him it was awakening. Her voice trembled as the fire in the grate popped suddenly, sending a shower of sparks upward. Holmes regarded her calmly. "Fear, madam, can be forged into a weapon as surely as steel. Your husband's terror was cultivated deliberately. I accepted a cup of bitter coffee from a tray a maid brought in. The warmth of the porcelain was welcome against my chilled fingers. Further search of the hidden recess revealed a single kid glove, fine leather, but stained inside with traces of gunpowder and bearing a small tear matching the ebony splinters on the desk. Not a gentleman's glove," Holmes murmured. "Rather part of a theatrical or mechanical prop. The chain lengthens." By late afternoon the rain had eased to a drizzle, and we returned to Baker Street. The fire burned brightly once more, driving the damp chill from our clothes. Holmes settled into his armchair, drawing thoughtfully upon his pipe as tobacco smoke curled toward the ceiling. "This reminds me strongly of the Hound of the Baskervilles," he said after a long silence. "There, phosphorus paint and a trained beast were used to resurrect an ancient legend and drive a man to his death. The Stapletons chained folklore to cold-blooded greed. Every glowing footprint, every baying howl, linked back to their scheme. Observation pierced the illusion, and the chain bound them at last. Just so here, the demon is no specter, but a man-made terror designed to cover a very human crime." I nodded slowly, tasting the lingering sweetness of brandy from a small glass Holmes had poured. "The pieces are beginning to fit together. The link was there. Did you forge it before Holmes?" Holmes saw 4 links clearly now. "How many did you spot?" "Watson missed several connections at first." "Did you? What chain would you build from these new observations?" "The connection seems invisible at the start." "Can you see it forming yet?" Before Holmes explains further, what does this growing evidence chain tell you? "The chain grows stronger. Logic binds." Chapter 4. Testing the links. In setting down this portion of the narrative, I recall how the pace of our investigation quickened dramatically on that third day, as Holmes set about deliberately testing each emerging link in the chain we had begun to forge. The morning light struggled weakly through the fog that still hung over Baker Street, but inside 221B the coal fire burned steadily, filling the room with warmth and the mingled scents of strong tobacco and the faint carbolic residue from Holmes' abandoned experiment of the previous night. Holmes stood before the hearth, hands clasped behind his back, eyes gleaming with purpose. "Today, Watson, we do not merely collect observations, we subject our provisional chain to strain. Weak links will fracture, strong ones will hold." He reached for his pipe, the smooth stem familiar under his fingers, and soon the sweet shag tobacco smoke curled upward. Our first test took us back to Mr. Elias Thorne's city offices. The hansom cab rattled briskly along the Strand, wheels clattering over damp cobbles, while the fog horns groaned from the river. Thorne's counting house still smelled of leather ledgers and ink. The fire in his grate crackled as he rose to meet us. "Back again, gentlemen." Thorne's voice carried forced heartiness. "I trust you've made progress on this dreadful business." Holmes wasted no time. "Your cuffs stained, the reddish clay from Whitechapel docks. You claimed a shipper's meeting. Yet your boots this morning are spotless, freshly blacked. One would expect lingering traces if the visit were recent and innocent." Thorne's color rose. "I changed footwear after returning. Nothing more sinister." Holmes produced the telegram fragment from the hidden panel. "This bears your initial. The ink is still slightly tacky in places, forged recently, I fancy, to create an appearance of urgency." Thorne blustered, but his hands trembled. The link cracked visibly. He offered no satisfactory explanation. Weak link shattered. Our second call was to Sir Victor Langford's club in Pall Mall. Gas lights burned even at midday against the gloom. The air inside carried strong pipe tobacco and the sweet undertone of brandy from the bar. Billiard balls clicked softly in the distance. Langford sat in a deep leather chair, newspaper in hand. "You persist in this nonsense?" he asked coldly. Holmes held up the telegram found on his table the previous day. "The handwriting matches yours, yet the ink on this document differs subtly in shade from that used on your club notepaper. A forgery, Sir Victor, perhaps to distance yourself from a canceled appointment you never intended to keep." Langford's jaw tightened. He set the paper down with deliberate calm. "Preposterous. My alibi stands." But his earlier confidence had ebbed. The smudges on his fingers now seemed damning. Another weak link fractured under pressure. We proceeded next to Miss Eliza Croft's Kensington lodgings. Rain had begun again, pattering on the roof. The small sitting room smelled of damp wallpaper and faint lavender. Miss Croft greeted us with red-rimmed eyes, pouring tea with unsteady hands. "I have told you everything," she whispered. "I love my uncle." Holmes produced a folded letter discovered earlier among her papers. "This demands money from Lord Harrington, written in your hand, dated only a week before his death. You spoke of affection, yet here is evidence of financial pressure." She covered her mouth. "It was only a request. He was generous. I never meant." Her voice broke. Motive remained, but her alibi, being at a dressmaker's, could not be immediately disproved. The link bent, but did not yet break. Our fourth test brought us to Dr. Oswald Grimshaw's Soho parlor. Incense hung thick in the air, mingling with gunpowder traces from some recent ceremony. Velvet curtains felt rough under my fingers as I passed. Grimshaw sat behind a table strewn with talismans, his hooded eyes watchful. "You returned to test the spirits?" he murmured. Holmes lifted one of the small vials from the shelf and uncorked it carefully. "I had this analyzed by a chemist friend overnight. Harmless herbal mixture, no poison, no corrosive capable of producing those wounds. Your protective symbols are theatrical, doctor, but not lethal." Grimshaw's thin smile faltered only slightly. "Then you see I am innocent of murder." Yet the gunpowder scent on his sleeves suggested recent handling of explosive devices, perhaps for stage effects. The occult link weakened considerably. Finally, we returned to the Harrington mansion to question Jenkins once more. The study felt colder than ever, the Persian rug still bearing faint bloodstains that carried a metallic tang. Jenkins stood rigidly by the door, carbolic soap sharp on his livery. "You delayed answering the scream by several seconds," Holmes observed quietly. "Long enough, perhaps, to conceal something?" Jenkins swallowed. I took a small sum from the desk drawer once, sir. Years ago. But I never harmed his lordship. Confession came, but only of petty theft. No chain to murder." Weak link shattered cleanly. Back at Baker Street that evening, the fire burned high and cheerful, driving the damp chill from our coats. Holmes settled into his armchair, pipe in hand. tobacco smoke drifting lazily. "The chain has been tested," he said. Thorne's dot connection and forged telegram broken by contradiction. Langford's alibi paper, forgery exposed. Grimshaw's potions, innocuous. Jenkins' delay, mere pilfering. Yet the mechanical glove, the ebony splinters, the hidden panel, the clay traces on Harrington's own boots all hold firm. The true chain emerges from the wreckage. I sipped sweet brandy, feeling its warmth spread. Then the demon was indeed man-made, a device to terrorize and conceal a very ordinary crime. The link was there. Did you forge it before, Holmes? What chain would YOU build from these tested observations? Holmes saw which links would shatter and which would endure. How many did you correctly predict? Watson missed several fractures at first. Did you? The connections seemed fragile in places. Can you see now which parts hold strongest? Before the final chain is revealed, what does this testing tell you about the killer's handiwork? Weak link shattered. The true chain emerges. Chapter 5. The Chain Tightens. As I record these lines in my journal, the memory of that fourth day returns with the sharp clarity of a chase through fog-bound streets, the moment when observation turned to pursuit and the chain we had so carefully forged began at last to tighten around our quarry. The morning broke cold and wet. Rain lashed the windows of 221B Baker Street, while the coal fire hissed and crackled, filling the room with warmth and the mingled scents of damp wool from our drying coats and Holmes' ever-present tobacco. Holmes stood at the window, watching the blurred gaslights below. The docks, Watson. The reddish clay on Harrington's boots and Thorne's cuff points us eastward. We go to Whitechapel this very hour. He plucked a few restless notes from his violin, then reached for his ulster and deerstalker. I followed, feeling the smooth handle of my revolver in my greatcoat pocket. The hansom cab plunged into the thickening fog as we crossed the city, wheels rumbling over slick cobblestones. The driver's whip cracked above the steady drumming of rain on the roof. Foghorns moaned from the river like wounded beasts. By the time we reached the Whitechapel docks, the air reeked of Thames mud, coal smoke, tar, and rotting fish. Cold iron railings felt damp and gritty under my gloved hand. Holmes moved swiftly along the quays, eyes scanning the warehouses. There, Thorne's silhouette by the third shed. He is not alone. We drew closer, keeping to the shadows of stacked crates. Through the open door, we glimpsed Thorne in heated conversation with Dr. Oswald Grimshaw. The faint metallic tang of gunpowder drifted out on the damp air. The device worked perfectly, Thorne was saying, voice low but carrying. The claws tore as intended. No one will connect us to the locked room. Grimshaw's hooded eyes glinted in the lantern light. The demon legend did its work. The family believes in curses now. But the glove, did you destroy it? Thorne cursed softly. It must still be in the panel. We return tonight. Holmes gripped my arm. The chain binds them both. Follow quietly. We slipped back into the fog as the two men separated. Thorne headed toward a narrow alley. Grimshaw toward a waiting cab. We pursued Thorne first, keeping a careful distance. His footsteps echoed on the wet stones. Rain pattered on our hats. He entered a small public house near the river, the Black Anchor, its windows fogged, the interior smelling of stale ale, tobacco, and wet sawdust. Holmes and I waited outside beneath a dripping awning until he emerged 20 minutes later, glancing nervously about. He is heading back toward Mayfair, Holmes whispered. But first, he will collect the evidence he fears remains. We hailed another hansom and followed at a discreet distance, the cab's leather seats creaking with every jolt. Big Ben tolled distantly through the mist. Near Grosvenor Square, Thorne dismissed his cab and approached the Harrington mansion on foot, keeping to the shadows of the garden wall. Holmes signaled me to circle round to the mews entrance. I felt the cold cobblestones through my boots as I moved silently. Moments later, a soft scrape sounded, Thorne forcing the garden gate. He disappeared inside. We waited until he re-entered the study through a side door. Holmes produced a duplicate key he had obtained from Lestrade earlier that day. We slipped in behind him. The room was dark save for the faint glow of a bull's-eye lantern Thorne carried. He knelt by the hidden panel, fingers fumbling. Holmes stepped forward into the light. "Enough, Mr. Thorne. The chain is complete." Thorne spun, lantern swinging wildly, his face drained of color. "How?" Holmes advanced calmly. The mechanical glove, ebony claws mounted on steel springs, gunpowder charged to simulate a savage tear. The link, blood traces inside matched Lord Harrington's. The ebony splinters in the desk wounds correspond exactly. The forge, I recall the case of the engineer's thumb, where a hydraulic press was used to mutilate and silence a witness. There, the chain was forged from a severed digit, grease marks on a floor, and the sound of machinery in the night, each link connecting until the counterfeiter's lair stood exposed. Victor Hatherley's escape provided the final bind. Just so here, your device, concealed in the panel, activated by a tripwire or clockwork trigger after Harrington entered alone. The chain, you and Grimshaw staged the demon to cover embezzlement. Did you imagine the glove would escape notice, dear reader? The bind. Thorne lunged toward the window, but I blocked the way. He sagged against the desk. It was Grimshaw's idea. The legend, the fear would divert suspicion. At that moment, Grimshaw himself appeared in the doorway, drawn, no doubt, by some prearranged signal. He froze when he saw us. Holmes spoke quietly. "Your potions were harmless, Doctor, but your stage props were lethal. The chain tightens. There is no escape now." Grimshaw tried to bolt. I caught his arm. The rain hammered harder against the panes as we secured them both. Lestrade arrived minutes later with constables, summoned by a prearranged wire. Back at Baker Street that night, the fire burned high. Holmes sat in his armchair, pipe in hand, tobacco smoke curling lazily. The breakthrough came when overheard words at the docks confirmed what the physical evidence already declared. Like the stockbroker's clerk, where a false position masked systematic theft, here the false demon masked greed and murder. I poured sweet brandy, tasting its warmth against the lingering chill. Remarkable, Holmes. The links held firm. The link was there. Did you forge it before Holmes? Holmes saw 4 links snap into final position. How many did you spot in time? Watson missed the significance of the overheard words at first. Did you? What chain would you build now that the quarry stands revealed? The connection seemed distant in the fog. Can you see it clearly at last? Before the full explanation unfolds, what does this tightening chain tell you about motive and method? The chain tightens. No escape now. Chapter 6. Links to the past. As I continue these pages in the quiet hours after midnight, the fire at 221B Baker Street burns low but steady, casting long shadows across the room and filling the air with the comforting smell of coal smoke and the last faint traces of Holmes' tobacco. The events of the 5th day, when the criminal history of our 2 principal suspects finally came into sharp focus, feel now like the moment when scattered threads are gathered into a single unbreakable cord. The rain had eased by morning, leaving only a damp mist that clung to the windows and carried the distant odor of Thames mud even here in Baker Street. Holmes rose early, already seated at the table with a pile of documents and old newspaper clippings spread before him. "The physical chain binds them to the act, Watson," he said without preamble, "but motive and precedent will seal the case beyond any reasonable doubt. We go first to the company's registry in the city, then to Scotland Yard's records." He reached for his deerstalker and ulster. I followed, feeling the smooth leather of my notebook in my coat pocket. The hansom cab carried us through streets still glistening from the night's rain, wheels hissing on wet cobbles, while Big Ben told the hour with muffled insistence. At the registry office, the air smelled of old paper, ink, and the carbolic polish the clerks used on the counters. Holmes requested files on Elias Thorne's ventures over the previous decade. The clerk returned with several ledgers and bundles of correspondence. "See here," Holmes murmured, turning pages with swift precision. Thorne's import-export firm collapsed in '87 after a series of questionable shipments. Colonial goods declared but never delivered. Creditors were paid pennies on the pound. Among the investors who lost heavily, one Reginald Harrington, who nevertheless took Thorne into partnership 2 years later. A generous act, or perhaps blackmail material. I felt the rough texture of the ledger paper under my fingertips as I leaned closer. Harrington discovered the fraud anew? Precisely. And look, Holmes tapped another entry. Dr. Oswald Grimshaw appears as a consultant on security and insurance matters for Thorne's reconstituted company in '89. Grimshaw's name recurs in police circulars from that period. Suspected of staging fake hauntings to extort money from superstitious clients. One case involved phosphorus-painted apparitions in a country house, very like the glowing hound we once pursued. The cold draft from the high windows chilled my neck as we left the building. Our next stop was Scotland Yard, where Lestrade met us in a small records room smelling of dust, old leather bindings, and faint gunpowder from stored evidence. He handed Holmes a thin file on Grimshaw. Minor convictions, fraud, obtaining money by false pretenses, Lestrade said. Never violent, but clever with props and chemicals. He vanished from sight after '89. Reappeared last year in Mayfair circles as a metaphysical advisor. Holmes studied the faded photographs and witness statements. Here, the same mechanical clawed device mentioned in an anonymous complaint. A client claimed Grimshaw demonstrated a demon glove to frighten a rival into paying a debt. The complaint was withdrawn, likely paid off. Back in the hansom, rattling toward Grosvenor Square, Holmes spoke quietly. The motive is now plain. Harrington, having once forgiven Thorne's earlier embezzlement, discovered fresh discrepancies in the partnership accounts, perhaps during their heated argument the day before the murder. He summoned Thorne to the docks for confrontation, hoping to resolve it privately. Thorne, fearing ruin and prison, enlisted Grimshaw. The demon legend, already circulating in Mayfair drawing rooms, was the perfect cover. A locked room horror no rational jury would connect to ordinary greed. We arrived at the mansion as twilight gathered. Lady Harrington permitted us access to her late husband's private desk once more. In a locked drawer, Holmes found a small ledger, Harrington's secret record of discrepancies, falsified invoices, diverted funds, all pointing to Thorne. A penciled note in the margin read, "Confronted usual place. No police yet." The final link to the past, Holmes said, closing the book gently. Harrington's generosity became his peril. He trusted too long. That evening we sat before the fire at Baker Street. The warm glow chased the lingering chill from our limbs. I tasted sweet brandy on my tongue as Holmes refilled my glass. He drew thoughtfully upon his pipe, smoke curling toward the ceiling like a slow revelation. This case recalls strongly the glorious Scott, he reflected after a long silence. There, too, past sins chained themselves to present violence. Old Trevor had concealed his convict history under a respectable name, but a single coded letter from a former shipmate, Patrick Evans, unraveled everything. The chain was forged link by link. The cryptic message, the sudden terror in the old man's face, the stroke that followed, and finally the confession of murder to silence the blackmailer. What began as youthful folly ended in blood because the past refused to stay buried. Just as here, Thorne's earlier fraud and Grimshaw's theatrical deceptions were not forgotten. They were revived, weaponized, and turned against the one man who knew too much. Observation does not merely discover truth, it forces the past to confess. I nodded slowly, watching the fire crackle. Then every link, clay from the docks, the mechanical glove, the forged telegram, the hidden ledger, connects present murder to old crimes. Exactly. Past and present are one unbroken chain. The link was there. Did you forge it before, Holmes? What chain would YOU build now that the history stands revealed? Holmes saw 5 links reach back across years. How many did you trace? Watson missed the significance of the old frauds at first. Did you? The connection seemed buried in time. Can you see now how deeply it runs? Before the final gathering, what does this revelation of the past tell you about the depth of their guilt? Past and present, one unbroken chain. Chapter 7. The complete chain. I set these words down with a sense of finality, for on the 6th day the chain we had forged link by link reached its full and unbreakable length. The fog that had shrouded London for so many days finally lifted in patches, allowing pale winter sunlight to pierce the windows of the Harrington mansion on Grosvenor Square. Holmes had arranged for all concerned parties to assemble in the very study where Lord Reginald Harrington met his end. The coal fire burned brightly once more, chasing the lingering chill. The air carried faint traces of carbolic from the servants' cleaning and the metallic tang that still clung to the Persian rug despite vigorous scrubbing. Inspector Lestrade stood near the door with 2 constables, his notebook open. Lady Harrington sat pale and composed in a high-backed chair, Miss Eliza Croft beside her clutching a damp handkerchief. Sir Victor Langford leaned against the mantel, arms folded. Mr. Elias Thorne and Dr. Oswald Grimshaw arrived last, in custody, wrists bound with cold iron chains that clinked softly as they were led to stand before the great mahogany desk. Jenkins hovered in the background, eyes downcast. Holmes stood in the center of the room, tall and calm, hands clasped behind his back. The fire crackled. Rain pattered once more on the barred windows. He began without preamble. Gentlemen and ladies, the complete chain of evidence now lies before us, forged link by link in reason and observation. I shall present it plainly, so that no link remains unexamined. He stepped to the desk and lifted the mechanical glove, ebony claws mounted on steel springs, the interior stained with dried blood. First, the physical evidence. Physical links. This device, found concealed in the hidden panel, produced the ragged wounds mistaken for demonic claws. Ebony splinters matched those in the desk. Gunpowder residue inside corresponded to the faint explosive charge that drove the mechanism. The glove's leather bore traces of Thorne's favorite saddle soap and Grimshaw's incense. Harrington's own boots carried reddish clay from the Whitechapel docks, where Thorne and Grimshaw met to finalize their plan. These material links bind the weapon directly to the perpetrators. He moved to the window, indicating the barred panes. Next, the timeline. Timeline links. Harrington sent a telegram to Thorne arranging a dockside meeting the morning of his death. Usual place. Urgent. Thorne's cuff later showed the same clay. The scream Jenkins heard came at noon. Medical evidence placed his death within minutes. The hidden panel, opened by a wax-molded duplicate key Grimshaw crafted, allowed the glove to be set as a trap. Harrington entered alone, locked the door from habit, triggered the device unwittingly. The locked room was no impossibility. It was engineered. Holmes turned toward the assembled witnesses. Witness links follow. Jenkins delayed his entry by seconds, long enough to see the glove retract but not to understand. Lady Harrington heard her husband speak of the demon awakening after consulting Grimshaw. Miss Croft overheard arguments about money. Most damning, our own pursuit at the docks, where Thorne and Grimshaw spoke openly of the device, and the clause, their words, overheard in the fog, form an unbreakable verbal link. He produced the small ledger from Harrington's drawer. Motive links complete the chain. Thorne embezzled funds from the partnership, false invoices, diverted colonial profits, totaling thousands. Harrington discovered this anew, forgave once before, but resolved to confront. The ledger notes the discrepancies and the dock appointment. Thorne, facing ruin, prison, disgrace, turned to Grimshaw, whose past frauds included staging supernatural terrors. Together they revived the Mayfair demon legend to mask a commonplace crime of greed. Finally, Holmes held up the crumpled telegram fragment from the panel. The last connecting link. This message, in Thorne's hand, luring Harrington to the fatal meeting. Ink analysis shows it written the day before. Every element, physical, temporal, testimonial, motivational, connects without fracture. Thorne's shoulders slumped. The chains clinked as he shook his head. It was meant to look like suicide or madness. The demon would frighten the family into silence. Reginald knew too much. We had no choice. Grimshaw's hooded eyes flashed defiance for a moment, then dulled. The legend was perfect cover. No one would believe rational men behind a locked room horror. Lestrade stepped forward. Elias Thorne, Oswald Grimshaw, you are under arrest for the murder of Lord Reginald Harrington. The constables moved. Chains rattled as manacles were checked. Lady Harrington rose slowly, tears in her eyes, but voice steady. Thank you, Mr. Holmes. The nightmare ends. Holmes inclined his head. Truth ends nightmares, madam. Deception only prolongs them. As the prisoners were led away, the room fell silent save for the fire's crackle and the soft rain. Sir Victor cleared his throat. My own forged telegram was merely to avoid an awkward meeting, nothing more. Holmes nodded. The red herring dissolved harmlessly. Miss Croft embraced her aunt. Jenkins stood straighter, relieved of suspicion. The chain had held. Every link accounted for. I looked at my friend with a familiar surge of admiration. His methods had once again turned chaos into order, illusion into certainty. The link was there. Did you forge it before, Holmes? Holmes saw the entire chain from the first muddy boot print. How many links did you connect before this final gathering? Watson missed several until the very end. Did you? What chain would you have built from these observations? The connection seemed hidden in fog and legend. Can you see now how every piece locks into place? Before you turn the page, what does this complete chain tell you about the power of observation over deception? Every link accounted for. The chain complete. Chapter 8. Justice in Chains. The arrest itself unfolded with the grim inevitability of a chain finally drawn taut. Twilight had deepened into early evening when the constables escorted Elias Thorne and Dr. Oswald Grimshaw from the Harrington Mansion study. Outside, the fog had returned in thin veils, curling around the gaslights of Grosvenor Square and carrying the damp smell of coal smoke and wet stone. Hansom cabs waited in line, their horses stamping restlessly on the cold cobblestones, the rhythmic clop of hoofs mixed with the soft jingle of iron manacles as the prisoners were guided down the front steps. Thorne walked with head bowed, shoulders hunched beneath his overcoat, the rough tweed sodden from the drizzle. His usual booming confidence had vanished. In its place came low, broken mutterings. It was never meant to end this way. Reginald was a friend once. The money, the ruin. I only wanted to save myself. His voice cracked on the last word, swallowed by the patter of rain on the carriage roofs. One constable gripped his arm firmly. The cold metal of the cuffs bit into his wrists, leaving red marks visible even in the dim light. Grimshaw, by contrast, held himself rigid, hooded eyes darting like a cornered animal. His long coat smelled faintly of incense and gunpowder, a lingering reminder of his theatrical deceptions. You think this ends the legend? He hissed as they neared the first cab. The demon of Mayfair will outlive us all. People will whisper of it long after we are forgotten. His defiance rang hollow. The chains clinked with every step, a steady metallic rhythm that mocked his words. Lestrade, walking beside him, gave a short, humorless laugh. Save your ghost stories for the Old Bailey, Doctor. The only demon here wore kid gloves and steel springs. Inside the mansion, the study felt suddenly larger and emptier without the prisoners. Lady Harrington stood near the hearth, the fire's warm glow casting flickering shadows across her pale face. She had not wept since the explanation. Instead, she held herself with quiet dignity, one hand resting on Miss Croft's shoulder. The young woman's eyes were red but dry now, her trembling stilled. Holmes moved to the hidden panel, now standing open, and withdrew the mechanical glove once more for Lestrade's formal evidence bag. Every loose thread is accounted for, he said quietly. Thorne's embezzlement ledger matches the discrepancies Harrington noted. Grimshaw's past frauds, phosphorus apparitions, staged hauntings provided the method. The forged telegram Sir Victor received was unrelated, merely his own attempt to avoid an awkward business discussion. Miss Croft's letter was a desperate but innocent plea for help with debts, not extortion. Jenkins' petty theft never touched murder. All red herrings dissolve in the light of truth. Lestrade nodded, sealing the bag with wax. Scotland Yard owes you another debt, Holmes. Without your chain of reasoning, we'd have chalked it up to madness or suicide and closed the file. The press would have run wild with demon tales for months. Holmes inclined his head. The truth owes nothing to gratitude, Inspector. It stands whether acknowledged or not. Lady Harrington stepped forward, voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. Holmes, Dr. Watson, you have given me back my home. The shadow that hung over it is lifted. I shall see that Reginald's name is cleared of any whisper of self-harm, and the estate Miss Croft will inherit without stain. Miss Croft managed a small, grateful smile. I only wish Uncle Reginald could know justice has come. Jenkins, lingering near the doorway, cleared his throat. If I may, ma'am, I'll stay on if you'll have me. The house needs steady hands now. Lady Harrington nodded. You are welcome to remain, Jenkins. We all begin anew. Outside, the cabs rolled away one by one, wheels crunching over wet gravel. Thorne's final glance back at the mansion held no anger, only a weary resignation. Grimshaw stared straight ahead, lips moving in silent incantation, as though still clinging to some fragment of occult power. The chains rattled faintly as the doors closed. The sound faded into the fog. Lestrade paused before climbing into his own cab. We'll have them at Bow Street by morning. The charge is willful murder. With your evidence, Holmes, they've no hope of escape. Holmes watched the vehicles disappear into the mist. Justice moves slowly, but it moves. The chain has done its work. We returned to Baker Street in silence, the hansom swaying gently. The fire still burned when we entered. Mrs. Hudson had left fresh tea and a plate of sandwiches. The room smelled of warm coal, tobacco, and the faint carbolic Holmes sometimes used to clean his instruments. I poured 2 glasses of sweet brandy, tasting its familiar warmth against the lingering chill of the evening. Holmes settled into his armchair, steepled his fingers, and gazed into the flames. A curious case, Watson. Not the most intricate we have faced, yet one where superstition very nearly triumphed over reason. Had the demon legend taken deeper root, the guilty might have walked free while an innocent family lived in terror. I nodded, feeling the smooth leather of the chair beneath me. Your chain held them fast. Link by link, as you always say. He gave a faint smile. And now the binding is complete. The link was there. Did you forge it before, Holmes? What chain would you have followed to its end? Holmes saw every fracture and every strength from the beginning. How many red herrings did you discard along the way? Watson nearly accepted 1 or 2. Did you? The connection seemed shrouded in claws and curses. Can you see now how plainly it resolves? Before the final chapters close, what does this scene of justice tell you about the quiet power of evidence over spectacle? The criminal bound. Justice served. Chapter 9. Links restored. With the prisoner safely lodged at Bow Street and the initial sensation of the case beginning to settle into the steady rhythm of legal process, the days following the arrest brought a gradual restoration of order to the household on Grosvenor Square and, in time, to the wider circles touched by Lord Harrington's death. The fog that had so persistently cloaked London during our investigation lifted at last, yielding to crisp winter sunlight that slanted through tall windows and chased the last damp chill from the rooms. At 221B Baker Street, the coal fire burned as steadily as ever, its warm glow mingling with a familiar sense of tobacco from Holmes' pipe and the faint carbolic he used to clean his instruments after handling evidence. The Old Bailey proceedings commenced within a fortnight. The courtroom smelled of polished oak, old leather bindings, and the faint musty odor of crowded galleries. Gaslights hissed overhead even in daytime. The wooden benches creaked under the weight of spectators and reporters. Elias Thorne and Dr. Oswald Grimshaw stood in the dock, manacled hands resting on the rail. Thorne's face had grown gaunt, the once boisterous financier reduced to quiet defeat. Grimshaw maintained a rigid composure, though his hooded eyes no longer held their former gleam of cunning. The Crown's case unfolded methodically. Lestrade gave evidence of the arrest and the recovered mechanical glove, producing it in a sealed glass case for the jury to examine. The ebony claws glinted under the courtroom lamps. Faint traces of blood were still visible on the leather lining. Medical testimony confirmed that the wounds matched the device exactly. No natural beast or self-inflicted harm could account for them. The hidden panel, the wax residue on the keyhole, the dockside clay on Harrington's boots, all were presented link by link. Holmes was called last. He entered the witness box with calm precision, voice clear and unhurried. He traced the chain aloud once more. The forged telegram, the overheard conversation at the docks, the ledger of embezzled funds, Grimshaw's history of staged hauntings. When asked how he first suspected artifice rather than supernatural agency, he replied simply, "I began with the boots, my lord." Mudd remembers where a man has walked, even when he denies it. The jury listened in attentive silence. Several nodded as the final connections were drawn. Thorne entered a plea of guilty to manslaughter and embezzlement, hoping to mitigate sentence. Grimshaw, defiant to the end, maintained innocence until the closing arguments crushed his last pretense. The judge, in summing up, spoke of a calculated and heartless deception designed to cloak greed and terror. Verdicts followed swiftly. Thorne received 15 years penal servitude. Grimshaw, 12. The courtroom murmurs rose and fell like waves. Outside, newspaper boys shouted headlines beneath gaslit street lamps. With the trial concluded, the innocent parties found themselves freed from suspicion's shadow. Miss Eliza Croft, now sole heiress to the Harrington estate, moved quietly into the Grosvenor Square house to care for her aunt. Lady Harrington, though still wearing mourning black, carried herself with renewed poise. She invited Holmes and me to tea one afternoon in late February. The drawing room smelled of fresh lavender and beeswax polish. Sunlight streamed across the Persian rugs, banishing the memory of bloodstains. "M.R. Holmes," she said, pouring from a silver pot whose steam carried the comforting aroma of strong tea. "You have given us back not only justice, but peace. The whispers of demons have faded. Neighbors call again without fear in their eyes." Miss Croft set down her cup, voice soft but firm. "I intend to use part of the inheritance to establish a small fund for those defrauded in investment schemes, something Reginald would have wished. And I have begun studying law at one of the women's colleges. No more helplessness." Holmes inclined his head. "A worthy legacy, Miss Croft." Reason triumphs where superstition faltered. Jenkins, reinstated and promoted to butler, moved about the room with quiet efficiency. "The house feels right again, sir," he confided to me as we left. "No more strange shadows or locked doors that frighten." Sir Victor Langford settled his own affairs without scandal. His forged telegram, merely a clumsy evasion of an awkward meeting, dissolved into irrelevance. He resumed his place in society untroubled. London itself seemed to exhale. The gaslights along the Strand burned steadily once more, their soft hiss mingling with the clatter of handsome wheels on dry cobbles. Vendors called headlines without mention of demons. The Thames flowed under clearer skies, its mud scent less oppressive in the fresh wind. Mayfair drawing rooms returned to talk of fashion, politics, and the coming season rather than curses. The city resumed its ordinary pulse, as though the brief nightmare had been only a passing dream. Back at Baker Street that evening, Holmes sat before the fire, violin resting across his knees. He drew the bow across the strings in slow, contemplative notes that filled the room with quiet melody. I settled into my chair, tasting the sweet warmth of brandy on my tongue. The chain is restored as well as complete, I remarked. Every innocent link freed, every guilty one bound. Holmes paused, bow suspended. Order returns when observation prevails, Watson. Deception thrives only in the dark corners we fail to illuminate. Mrs. Hudson entered with fresh coals. The fire crackled brighter. Outside, Big Ben told the hour through the crisp night air. The link was there. Did you forge it before Holmes? Holmes saw the restoration even as he forged the binding. How many innocent futures did you foresee when the guilty stood exposed? Watson watched the shadows lift one by one. Did you? What chain would you see mended in the wake of justice? The connection seemed broken forever in grief. Can you see now how firmly it knits together again? Before the final quiet evening, what does this return to normalcy tell you about the enduring strength of truth? Order restored to London's streets. Chapter 10. By the Fire at Baker Street. Several weeks had passed since the trial concluded, and the last echoes of the Mayfair demon faded from the newspapers. One quiet March evening found Holmes and me once more in our familiar sitting room at 221B Baker Street. The coal fire burned steadily in the grate, its warm orange light pushing back the faint chill that still lingered in the London air. The room smelled pleasantly of tobacco from Holmes' pipe, the sweet undertone of brandy in our glasses, and the clean carbolic scent that always clung faintly to his chemical corner. Outside, Big Ben told the hour with distant, measured strokes. The clatter of a late hansom cab faded into the night. Holmes sat in his usual armchair, legs stretched toward the hearth, violin resting across his knees. He had been drawing slow, meditative notes from the strings, nothing vigorous, merely a gentle exploration of melody that seemed to match the calm settling over us after the storm. I occupied my own chair opposite, a copy of the evening paper folded on the table beside me. The headlines had moved on. No more demons, only reports of ordinary crimes and the coming spring. Mrs. Hudson had just cleared away the dinner things and left a fresh pot of tea steaming on the sideboard. I poured 2 cups, adding a splash of milk to mine, and handed one to Holmes. He set the violin aside and accepted it with a nod of thanks. A satisfactory conclusion, Watson, he remarked after a sip. The papers call it the case of the mechanical demon sensational, but at least they credit the mechanism rather than the mythology. I smiled. You would prefer the case of the reddish clay on the boots, I suppose. He gave a short laugh. Precisely. Mud tells more truth than headlines. We sat in companionable silence for a time, the fire crackling softly, the gasaging hissing on the mantel. Then Holmes leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and steepled his fingers in that familiar way. This affair has set me thinking again about the method we employ, the chain of deduction. It is not magic, nor intuition, but a simple, relentless progression. One observation becomes a link. Logic forges the connection to the next. Each new fact must fit, or the chain fractures. When every link holds, the truth stands revealed, unbreakable. He paused, gazing into the flames. Consider the first link. The mud on Harrington's boots, reddish clay mixed with coal dust from Whitechapel foundries. Most men would see only dirt. I saw a journey denied. From that single trace the entire path unfolded. The dockside meeting, the embezzlement, the staged horror. Link by link, the illusion crumbled. I nodded slowly. It reminds me of our earliest adventure together, the Lauriston Gardens mystery in a study in scarlet. There, too, the chain began with trifles. A word scrawled in blood, a wedding ring too large, tracks in the dust. Jefferson hopes vengeance, stretched back years, love betrayed, poison administered in slow revenge, but every step was marked. The cabman's whip, the pillbox, the poison itself, all connected until the murderer stood confessed in our very sitting room. Holmes' eyes gleamed with that peculiar light. Exactly. In both cases, deception relied on overwhelming the senses, blood and drama here, a glowing hound there. Yet observation defeats spectacle every time. The human mind, when trained, sees not the terror but the mechanism behind it. Phosphorus paint, mechanical claws, forged telegrams. Eliminate the impossible, the supernatural, and what remains, however improbable, is truth. He rose and paced slowly before the fire, hands clasped behind his back. The science of deduction is nothing more than disciplined attention. Most people observe without seeing. They note the surface, but miss the connections. A scratch on ebony becomes meaningless until linked to steel filings. A wax trace on a keyhole is trivial until tied to a hidden panel. But when each detail is weighed, tested, fitted into place, the chain grows of its own accord. Weak links, Langford's clumsy forgery, Croft's innocent plea, Jenkins' petty theft, snap under pressure and fall away. The strong ones endure and bind the guilty. He stopped and turned to me. That is why these cases never cease to fascinate. Not the drama, but the quiet victory of reason over chaos. Every criminal believes his scheme invisible, his tracks erased. Yet the world leaves marks, mud on boots, ink on fingers, splinters on wood, and logic reads them as plainly as print. The chain does not invent, it discovers what was always there. I set my cup down, feeling the smooth porcelain still warm in my hands. You make it sound almost inevitable. It is inevitable, he replied, when one refuses to be deceived. The game is never truly over. New chains await forging. But tonight, at least, we may rest. He returned to his chair and picked up the violin again, drawing a few soft, lingering notes that seemed to echo the peace of the room. The fire popped gently. Outside, the city moved on, hansoms rattling, footsteps on wet pavements, the low hum of gaslights hissing in the dark. I looked across at my friend, his profile sharp against the glow, and felt a deep contentment. The demon was banished, the innocent restored, the guilty bound. London's streets lay quiet once more under the stars, until the next puzzle presented itself, until the next faint mark or contradictory detail caught his eye. We could sit in this warm circle of light and let the world turn without us for a little while. The link was there. Did you forge the entire chain before the final revelation? Holmes saw every connection from the first muddy tread. How many links did you hold in place when others fell away? Watson recorded them faithfully, yet even he marveled at the pattern only when complete. Did you? What chain would YOU forge from the observations scattered across these pages? The connections seemed hidden in fog, legend, and fear. Can you see now how plainly they lock together? Before we close this journal, what final wisdom does the completed chain offer about the triumph of careful sight over every deception? Until the next chain forges, dear listener, the game continues.